Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to class. Sorry it took a few extra moments today because basically I was having some real problems with the live stream. Are any of you guys here? Can you find this stream? Let's see. Go ahead if you can, please come to the meeting. All right, good. We're here now. I can see that it's up. So let's see how many of you guys will find the meeting. Sorry for the little bit of delay. There were some technical difficulties. Basically, the previous lecture that I was teaching from 12:45 to 2:10, there were issues with getting the stream to stop. It basically wouldn't allow me to end that stream, and that meant that it was not possible for me to establish the next one. So what I had to end up doing is basically delete their video, and I'll just forward them a copy of our class meeting so that they still will have it in their records. But that caused me to have a delay. I was really struggling to find out how I could close that other stream, and in the end, the only option I had, because it was taking so long and it didn't seem that an immediate solution was presenting itself, therefore I had to just delete that video. Now this video is running live and we're all here. So thanks again, guys, and sorry for the little bit of a snafu at the beginning here. But I don't know if any of you guys have any kind of live chat, or I should say group chat, like Discord or something, where you guys communicate off of the outside of the class. But if so, try to get people to come. I'm going to send another Canvas announcement right now, just letting them know that the stream is up. Okay, so just sending that. All right, welcome back, everybody. Good to see you guys. So as we wait for a couple more maybe to arrive and get to our meeting, it's good to see you all. I hope you had a good weekend. The plan today and for the next couple meetings is to try and take on the material in Chapter 4. And then when we're done with that, we'll be ready to start getting prepared for the midterm and your midterm exam. So that's the schedule going forward. This week, 2 meetings, Tuesday and Thursday, both on Chapter 4. And good to see everyone in the comments. If you haven't had a chance, make sure to leave behind some type of comment for the class as a way of keeping your attendance noted. Now, here's my question to just begin. When we were here last time, I think we covered a couple of the rhetorical devices, but we didn't get to all of them. What is the last notes that you guys have from Chapter 3? Did you have notes on euphemism and dysphamism, and that's it? Or did we also talk about hyperbole or sarcasm? Just asking about the rhetorical device section of notes. If you could let me know about that. I was going to look at this on the prior video, but I was so busy trying to get the stream established that I couldn't quite do that little last second prep. So if you don't know, it's okay, I'll find out, but let me know if you can. Where do you see the notes ending from the last meeting on Thursday last week? Because according to my memory, and what I think I remember from the video, we got all the way to rhetorical devices. We talked about euphemism, dysphamism, but then there were just a couple of leftover rhetorical devices. So I'm asking, is that where you have your notes also? Euphemism and dysphamism, and then that's it? Just let me know. You do have to look at your notes or use your memory for just a second here. Okay, thank you, Oliver. Perfect. So there's just a couple last items then in Chapter 3. So let's go back to that for a moment, rhetorical devices. And then when we're done with that, we'll be able to move on to the next chapter, which is Chapter 4. So rhetorical devices are ways that language can be used to manipulate or shape people's perspectives. We talked about 2 of them, euphemism and dysphamism. Okay, and I'll cover those. Thank you, Lance. So euphemism is just a reminder when you replace a negative or neutral word with a more positive sounding one to make it sound better, to sugarcoat the truth. So for example, like describing an old car as vintage or a small house as cozy, a person dying as passing away. These would all be random examples of euphemisms. So they're trying to make the thing sound better just with language. Dysphamism is the opposite, when you replace a more positive or neutral word with a negative sounding one to create disapproval. So in that case, there could be like a person calling cigarettes cancer sticks, or a person calling the estate tax the death tax. to make a person think more negatively of the thing by applying the dysphamistic label. Okay, and so a few more rhetorical devices. Hi, everybody. Good to see you guys. Ryan, Jordan, Lan, Oliver, Anna, everybody else. Sorry, it took a few moments to get the stream established, but better late than never, and it's good to be with you. So here are some other rhetorical devices. There's also hyperbole. Okay, and there's sarcasm. And of course, you've got deception. Okay, so just a brief note about each of these. What's hyperbole? So hyperbole is the use of exaggeration or overstatement to distort the truth. Okay. Use of exaggeration or overstatement to distort the truth. So that's hyperbole, when people exaggerate going beyond the facts. Say, for example, an innocent case could be like someone's like, oh, I literally died when I saw the midterm, you know, like the person didn't literally die. That's obviously exaggeration. In that case, it's kind of innocent enough. It's just to sort of emphasize how scary the person thought the test was or something. But oftentimes, you know, when you get into the habit of exaggerating, you start to do it by second nature. And then after a while, it makes you seem less credible. Take a person who hyperbolically exaggerates facts about their work history in a job interview, or in a dating relationship. They start to exaggerate facts about their prior personal history. Honesty is the best policy. You don't need to exaggerate, overinflate, and you know, overemphasize the truth. When you do that, you start to undermine your own credibility. After a while, it's hard for people to know whether to take you seriously or not. So don't, you know, go beyond the facts. Stick to the truth. Or at least when you do use hyperbole, do it in a way where everyone's in on the joke and there's no kind of loss of credibility on your end. Next up, sarcasm. Sarcasm is when a person uses this kind of characteristic ironic tone of voice. It's the use of irony, ridicule, or taunting to deflect critical thought or to make light of the subject of sarcasm. So use of irony, ridicule, or taunting to deflect critical thought or make light of someone or something. Okay, so sarcasm. You know, I think a lot of times young people understand sarcasm pretty well. We oftentimes use sarcasm, make sarcastic comments, posts, statements, etc. The type of sarcastic comment that you guys have all heard is that type of intonation with the tone of voice, which reveals your sarcastic frame of mind. It's written or typed and you don't mean to be taken literally. Sometimes with sarcasm, when a person uses it, they say something which they don't literally mean. Usually the tone of voice of sarcasm, etc., makes clear to the audience that hears you that they're not to be taking seriously the literal content of what you've said. Like as an example, suppose you're hanging out with somebody and you inadvertently turn your arm and you bump into like an expensive heirloom of the family, knocking it to the ground and it shatters into a million pieces. So suppose this has been in the family for a long time, an old piece of glassware that they keep, and the first response that someone says to you is, wow, awesome, yeah, you literally broke that vase. Good job, high five, right? Like in that case, the person's not really praising you. They don't think you did a good job or that you deserve a compliment. This is like sarcastic praise, which is supposed to give the message to you that you were clumsy, awkward, and you did something bad. And that's how sarcasm works. Somebody does something foolish and you're like, wow, Einstein over here, genius move, you know, or you don't like something and you sarcastically comment, oh, I would love to, you know, babysit for you. Yeah, that sounds like a great way to spend my Saturday. You know, so sarcasm, the tone of voice, it's dripping with irony. People understand that you're just speaking in jest or facetiously. Now, the thing with sarcasm, kind of like with hyperbole, is that it does sometimes have its place. It can be all fun and games if everyone is in on the joke and you're in good company. But the problem is that sometimes people use it too often and it becomes a habit. If it does, then after a while you start to undermine your own credibility. Like take a case where a person posts something offensive online and people call them out, like, why did you post that? That's terrible. And they say, oh, you can't take a joke. I was just being sarcastic. How many times can you really revert to that lame excuse that you're just being sarcastic and you're joking? There's a time for jokes, but there's a time to be serious. And if you're always sarcastic and everything's just a big LOL joke to you, then after a while people don't take you seriously and you start to lose touch with how serious you are. Like you don't even know when you mean what you're saying and when you're just kidding around. So use sarcasm sparingly. It has its place. It sometimes is funny, but if it's overdone, it can turn you into a less serious and less honest person. And then finally, there's deception. Deception is basically, there's two kinds. There's active and then there's passive deception. So let me define them and give you some quick examples. One type of deception, active. So what is active deception? That's when you basically lie, when you deliberately say something false in order to mislead some person. So when you deliberately, meaning you're not just saying something false accidentally, like you're misinformed, but when you deliberately say something false in order to mislead people. That's one type of deception. That's active deception. But there's also passive deception, okay? And what is that? I'm just going to put it here, passive deception. Passive deception is basically like lies of omission, they are sometimes called. It's not saying something false, but instead it's withholding the truth. So it's not giving the facts and truth to someone who would be in a position to know. So that is withholding the truth. So sometimes, you know, active deception is called lies of commission, committing a falsehood. These are sometimes lies of omission, omitting the truth. But both are deceptive and dishonest. So like here, I'll give examples. Suppose someone was cheating in a relationship with their partner and the question is asked, have you ever cheated? Are you cheating on me seeing someone else? They have been. But they're like, they say, no way, I would never ever do that. Completely false. So they know that they did. And they're saying this false statement in order for the person to get the wrong belief, in order for this person to come away thinking that they've never cheated and they've remained faithful. So that would be active deception, saying something false to try and get the person to be misinformed. Passive deception would simply be not to bring it up. You know, you just don't say anything. Pass the salt. This is a great meal. You're eating the meal. Meanwhile, you've been having an affair, and you just don't bring it up. So both are dishonest. One is lying about the existence of the affair, and the other is just not revealing it. That's one case in like an individual circumstance of a relationship. But, you know, you can imagine in the job interview or the job application, similar type of deception. What if you lie about your prior work history? You say, oh yeah, I was promoted to supervisor and I had a lot of very important duties. None of that was true. Suppose the person's just lying to make their application seem stronger. That's active deception. Passive deception could be like not informing the employer about some parts of your work history. Like just don't list the fact that you got this one job that you got fired from. So they would both be deceptive because you're trying to prevent the employer from coming to the truth about your actual record. One would be to embellish the record and lie about it. Another would be to not state certain facts from the record that you find to be, you know, I don't know, less than favorable to you. So in life, we want to be honest. You know, honesty is the best policy. Sometimes we may think it's innocent enough to tell a little white lie, as they call them, and I guess sometimes that's true. Someone asks you, do you like this meal that I cooked? And you're like, it's disgusting, but you don't want to tell them that because you hurt their feelings. So you say, oh, it was delicious, right? Maybe in certain cases like this, a little dishonesty is not necessarily to anyone's disadvantage, and it's fine. But you should try your best to be honest. If you find yourself being deceptive on a regular basis, people will come to know that eventually. And you know, it's going to come back to haunt you when you get exposed as a dishonest person. Nobody likes or trusts those that are dishonest. You may have heard the story as a child, the boy that cried wolf, right? I don't remember all the details myself anymore, but I remember something about like a boy would cry wolf and there was no wolf. So he just kind of wanted to get everyone worried about it and riled up. But then eventually a real wolf was there. And now he wanted people to trust and believe in his words. But he had already eroded his credibility through this track record of being dishonest. So now people were just ignoring him like, yeah, right, there's no such thing as this wolf. So that's the thing too. Deception has a cost. You may think, oh, I'm going to get away with stuff and I'm going to get away with these lies. But after a while, if people discover that this is the way you act, they're not going to believe you. And someday you're going to need people to trust you. And that's when it'll matter a lot that you kind of undermine your credibility through an act or through a pattern of dishonesty. So anyway, to the best of our ability, we want to find out the truth. Critical thinkers want to come to the truth. So we should do our best to be truthful when we are in a position to provide information to others as well. Okay, so that's it for the rhetorical devices, everyone. I said that we would go over hyperbole, sarcasm, and deception, 2 kinds of deception. And so now that closes the discussion from chapter 3. And we can move on then. So we're now on to the next chapter of our book, which is chapter 4. Chapter 4, the major topic is knowledge and what are the limits of human knowledge. So how do we get it? What is it? What are the component parts, criteria for having knowledge? And what are the things that sometimes stand in the way of us getting the knowledge that we want? What are certain mental habits and errors of judgment that any of us can sometimes make? Cognitive and perceptual errors that block our pursuit of knowledge. So we're learning about now chapter 4, knowledge and its limits. Knowledge and its limits. Sorry, just one thing about this topic that I'm very interested in. Well, it has a lot to do with stuff that I was a specialist on and still am kind of in the academy. Pursuing my PhD in philosophy, the area of study within philosophy that I specialized in was epistemology, which is just a fancy word in the academy for the theoretical study of knowledge. So at a high level, you know, I have reviewed a lot of literature on what knowledge is and what are some different theories about, you know, the parts of it that build it up. So it's a topic anyway, I'm just saying that I take a lot of interest in, and all the subjects in this class are interesting to me, but I do have a lot of additional favor on chapter 4. So it's a fun chapter, basically. Okay, so when we start chapter 4, as the book does in other chapters, they bring up like a real world example of some stuff to kind of set the stage of the topic. Chapter 1, they talked about those social psychology experiments to kind of give a sense of how important it is to be a good critical thinker in life. In chapter 3, they talked about the Benghazi episode and scandal to give you a sense of how important it is to be an effective and accurate communicator. Now, chapter 4, the beginning of the chapter goes over some cases of medical error and mistakes in the medical profession. Learning about those gives us a sense of how it's possible for even highly skilled and well-trained professionals to make errors in their judgment. So it's a reminder to all of us that that's something that any of us can do as well. So here are some famous cases of medical error to mention. In 1995, there was a university hospital in Florida. They were supposed to operate on Mr. William King. Willie King needed to have one leg amputated, unfortunately, because it had become infected and gangrenous. So you had to remove that leg, otherwise it will poison his bloodstream and could cause further harm to his organs. So anyway, the surgical team prepped him for surgery. He was placed under the full anesthetic. But once they had readied themselves to do the operation, they somehow miscommunicated and they operated on the wrong leg. Okay, so they amputated the healthy leg. What a terrible result, because obviously he still had to have the unhealthy one removed. So he became a double amputee just because of this human error. Another case, the Hollywood actor Dennis Quaid had newborn twins. They were born with a blood disorder, and so they had to be given a blood thinning medication to treat that. It's called heparin. But the dose that was administered to the twins was 1,000 times beyond the recommended dosage. So that was another medical accident that almost killed those twins. And so, you know, these are just a couple of cases scratching the surface, but obviously there's a lot of cases of medical error that do happen. Not often, we hope, but it's possible and it has happened. Why do these things happen? Well, because of human error. Errors in the processing of information, cognitive errors. That's actually the leading cause of medical mistakes in the profession. Now, after those things happen, all kinds of additional protocols are developed to try and prevent it from ever happening again, like double backup computers, safety officers monitoring everything. But again, the reminder is that even highly trained professionals in fields where a lot is on the line, life and death and health and well-being, can still experience these kind of mental mistakes that lead to such errors. So we shouldn't take the moral of the story to be, oh, these were incompetent workers doing a terrible job. I mean, they did make mistakes, but they were highly skilled professionals that made these mistakes. So it's just a reminder that the capacity to make mental error is there for any of us, not just for some and not others. So good critical thinking requires that we evaluate information and evidence carefully, and that we are aware of the potential cognitive errors we can make so that we avoid jumping to the wrong conclusions. By monitoring yourself and being aware of your susceptibility to error, you're going to be better at screening off and eliminating those mistakes. So we continue with chapter 4, and now we get started on those notes. The first thing that's described in the notes is what is knowledge? Just what does the word knowledge mean? And so here we go, knowledge. So you might be surprised to know that the word knowledge has a well-known definition in philosophy that goes back thousands of years. So this traces back to the cradle of Western civilization, the ancient Greeks, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. They described knowledge in these terms. And the definition of knowledge that they gave remained the dominant understanding for thousands of years. In fact, to the current day, it still is pretty much the well-received knowledge definition. But to be fair, there was this one American author in 1963, Edmund Gettier, and he challenged this long-standing definition, and that's a very interesting criticism that he gives. But that's for another discussion, a different day. Anyway, what's the base definition of knowledge that we've had for so long? I'll tell you now. It's three main parts: justification, truth, and belief. To be precise, it is when you believe something which is true and you have justification for that. So this is information that we believe which is true, and last part, and for which we have justification. Okay, so there's three major ingredients or parts to this definition: truth, belief, and justification. So these three pieces are the key component parts. For you to have knowledge, all three of those criteria have to be met. You have to believe something is true. Then it has to actually be true, so you're getting it correct. And finally, you have to have justification for believing that true belief. Now, epistemologists sometimes like to simplify this definition down to an acronym, and you'll oftentimes see it written as follows. K, which will stand for knowledge, is equal, kind of like an equation, equal to JTB. And JTB are just the three initials of justification, truth, and belief. So for you to have knowledge, each of those three boxes has to be checked off. It has to be something true that you believe and that you have justification for believing. So now let's go even further into the analysis of this. I want you guys to report back to me now in this chat what the definition of these two pieces of knowledge are, because we talked about these early in the class, so now that's coming back. What is it for a sentence to be true? Let's see if anyone can tell me this. For a sentence or a statement to be a true one, what does that require? What's the definition of truth, in other words? Let me know. And it'll take a moment, but got a lot of time. So just inform me and the rest of us here, anybody. What's the definition of truth for a sentence to be true? What does that have to require? What does that mean? So just let me know. For a sentence to be true. Like while you're writing or thinking, I'm going to keep talking a little bit, but do give me the answer. Is it true that I'm wearing a watch? Is it true that I'm wearing a hat? Just some examples to think about. Okay, so Alex, or Lan, I guess. It has to match the facts of reality. Okay, yeah, but we could say that even more in precision, that the sentence has to match the facts of reality, whatever the sentence says. Okay, correct, guys, good. So a sentence is true when it matches the facts of reality, when it mirrors what's real. If I tell you I'm wearing a watch, that is true because I'm not just saying it. It's a fact. You can see that it is on my wrist. Now, if I say I'm wearing a hat, that's not true. That's a statement, but it doesn't mirror the real world and what is happening in it because, as you can see, there's no hat on my head. So statements, sentences that people say or write can have one of two possible statuses. They could be true or they could be false. When they're true, they match up to the way the world is. So like if I say to you that I was born in the 80s, that's just the truth. That's the date and time of my birth in that decade anyway. If I said I was born in the 50s, that's not the case. That is not correct to the facts. So for you to know something, first of all, it has to be a statement that is true. Next of all, let's talk about belief again. What is a belief? What is it to believe a sentence? And, you know, again, this kind of involves the concept of truth as one of the words in the definition. So what is a belief? New question to answer. Truth, we got it. We say it's when a sentence matches reality. Yes, that's right. But what is a belief? Just let me know. When the person thinks that the sentence is true, that's very correct, yes. So when you think a sentence is true, you believe it. Not everybody has the same set of beliefs. Say there's one person who, regarding the sentence, there's aliens in outer space. That person says, I think so, I believe they're out there. So they believe that sentence. Another person says, I don't believe that. You know, God created us in his image. He wouldn't make weird aliens out there. So that person may say to the statement that there are aliens, I don't think it's true. I don't think that's the reality. Beliefs are kind of up to you, what you think is true or not, but there's just one set of facts. So concerning the question whether there's alien life, if two people disagree on that and have different beliefs, they cannot both be correct because, you know, there either are or there aren't, but they can't be both there and not there. So yeah, for you to have knowledge, you have to think something's true, but that's not enough. It has to really be true. So a false belief could never be knowledge because you can't know things that are incorrect. One more piece though, and that's justification. The letter J standing for justification. Now, I haven't taught you yet about the word, but I think it's something that maybe you already have a kind of at least vague sense of from your just everyday life. So let's see if anyone could guess even. What do you think it means if a person has a justified belief? What do you think is the difference between a belief that is justified versus an unjustified belief? What gives a belief the status of having justification, you think? Just a question to ask. But let me know if you can give any kind of even guess about it. I think it's easy enough to maybe reason through. What do you think is it for a belief to be justified as opposed to not being justified? Okay, that's great. Thanks, Philip. So it is when there's evidence that you have that supports the belief. So justification is having the evidence or reasons to support your belief. Okay, so let me put that here actually at the top. Justification. It's having good evidence or reasons to support your belief. Okay, so now that we've given a little bit of a reminder of what these words mean, belief and truth, and now we've added to our knowledge what justification means, we can more fully state and explain this definition. Knowledge is having a belief that is true and is based on good evidence. If all three of these conditions are met, we say that that person knows something. But if any of the conditions are violated or not met, even 1 out of 3, then it's not knowledge. So 2 out of 3 is not good enough. If you have a true belief but no evidence, that's not knowledge. If you have a belief which is based on good evidence but it's not true, again, that is not knowledge. So it requires all 3 to be satisfied. You say having strong inductive or sound deductive arguments, yes, but the argument overall contains a conclusion. The conclusion is one of the pieces of evidence. It's the thing that's supposed to be supported by the evidence. So you can think of justification as kind of equivalent to the premises of the argument when the premises are capable of providing adequate support to that conclusion. Yes. Okay, so let's just go through some thought experiments and examples here to try and justify or reinforce this definition. let me ask this. Can any person out here in the world know that, like, I'm Dr. Vulich, okay? Let me ask you, can a person know that I am 10 feet tall? Is that possible? Is it possible for somebody to know that I'm 10 feet tall? So consider this question and give me what you think is the answer. Is that something that someone could ever know about me? Is that something that's even eligible to be knowledge? The statement that Dr. Vulich is 10 foot tall in height. Okay, yeah, no one can know this. Correct. But let's follow up with another question. And the question is just why? Why can't somebody know that? Based on this concept of knowledge that we're now learning about, maybe you will be able to tell me. So why is that not even eligible to be knowledge? The statement that I am 10 feet tall. Why not? Because you say it's not knowledge, and yes, that cannot be knowledge. And there's an obvious reason why not. But maybe you'll tell me what that reason is. Why is it not possible for someone to know that? Why not? Or you, for example, how come someone can't know that you're 10 feet tall? Yeah, well, they could believe it, but they can't know it because it's not true. Exactly. Very good, guys. It's not possible to know something false because that means that you're not getting it correct. But having knowledge requires that it's not just something you think, but it's actually true. So land, it's not just that they don't have justification. I mean, that's one problem. But it's just not true. It's fundamentally not true. Not only am I not 10 feet tall, but no one has ever been 10 feet tall. There's been an 8'11" man, that's crazy, but there's Robert Wadlow, about 100 years ago, he died. He had a malfunction of the growth hormone and pituitary gland, and it just made him continue growing until he, passed away early at the age of 27. But anyway, that's a side note. What I'm telling you, though, is it's not possible to know this because it's obviously not true. Now, what could someone, about the statement that I'm 10 feet tall, I forget the name associated with your username here. Okay, Matthias, I got it. So Matthias, you're right. Nobody could ever know that because it's simply straight up false. It's not true. But I guess if someone was, I don't know, on a lot of drugs or whatever, and they're hallucinating and seeing visions, seeing me stretched out like an accordion or something, then that person might believe in that moment that I am 10 feet tall if it looks like that to their visual system. But you could never know it because it's simply just false. Just like nobody could know that you were born in 1930 or something. No one could know that about you because it's simply not the case. So only things that are true are even candidates for knowledge. Now, let's go into another example. Take a case where someone has a belief and it's true, but they have no evidence, right? So like, suppose right now I'm just guessing, and I'm guessing that there's an even number of registered voters in the United States, right? So like take the number of registered voters in the US right now, and I'm just going to say it's an even number, a number that's divisible into a whole number by 2, all right? Now, could that be correct? Could it be correct that that's true? I mean, it very well could be. It has a 50% chance of being correct because every number is either even or odd if it's a whole number. And therefore, I guess I have 50% odds of being right. Now, if I believe that and it's true, do I really know it though, sitting here right now? I don't, because I'm just guessing. If it's true, it's a lucky guess. And a lucky guess is just something speculative and it's not knowledge. So in order for me to actually know this statement to be true, I would have to have some kind of facts or evidence to base it on. Like I just completed a full census of all the registered voters and the numbers have been tallied up and I can see on the page that it is this even number. But since I haven't done that and it's a mere guess, it's not knowledge, even if it is something that could be knowledge if it was based on the right kind of evidence, Suppose another example, I believe in extraterrestrial aliens. I think they're real just because suppose I really love science fiction, so I think they're out there. And that's the belief I have. Could it be true? It could be, even though I don't know if it's true. But suppose that right now there is some alien out there somewhere far off in the universe, and I believe it. Do I really know it though? Standing here today, do I know that there are these aliens? Not yet. I could only know it if there's evidence that arrives, which gives additional justification to this true belief, if it's true. Okay, so if any of these conditions isn't met, it throws off the case of knowledge. Take a juror who's about to weigh in on the guilt or innocence of a person who's a defendant in the court in trial. And suppose they just look at them on day one and they're like, I don't like this person's look, so I just think they're guilty. And I'm not even going to listen to any of these arguments the lawyers present because I've made up my mind on day one before we've even heard the evidence. That person thinks they're guilty. Let's suppose that their wild guess is actually correct. But do they know the person's guilt? Not yet. In order to know it, they would have to have some kind of evidence. They would have to hear the evidence and then base the decision of guilt on the evidence. So knowledge cannot exist if your belief is incorrect, nor can it exist if you have no evidence to base it on. You have to have a belief which is correct, but also based on good evidence. And I'm just going to give you guys one more example to maybe reinforce this and drive the point home even more. Because I think this is one you can relate to since you guys are students and you oftentimes take tests, quizzes, and things like that. So suppose you were in some kind of class that gave a multiple choice questionnaire on a quiz or test. And the questionnaire says this, please tell me the year that Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World. And they offer you these 4 options, multiple choice. 1492, that's A. B, 1692. C, 1892. Or D, 2024. All right, so you heard the 4 options. When did Christopher Columbus sail the ocean blue to the New World? 1492, 1592, sorry, 1492, 1692, 1892, 2024. So you're the student now. You get this question. Let's imagine that you're the kind of student who's like, okay, well, I could rule out D because that's the future. And this is a history class, so it can't possibly be in the future, I think. So it's got to be one of these other years, but I just don't know the year. I'm so bad with dates. Just imagine the students thinking these thoughts. So they're like, I don't know, 14, A, B, C, which one could it be? I'm just going to make a guess. I don't know. Let's go with the B answer, which says 1692. So they filled in B. Now, you guys, I don't know, this is not a history class, but probably this is a key date that many of us do remember. Tell me, did the student who filled in 1692, bubble B, did they know the answer? That's an easy question. Did they know the answer to this question of when Columbus sailed or not? Does that person have knowledge by filling in B and reporting 1692 as their answer? Does this get credited as knowledge, yes or no? Question again. The student who has filled out B, 1692, in reply to this history question, they don't know the answer, right? And why don't they know the answer? It's so obvious, I hope anyway. It's because they gave the wrong answer. It's not correct or true that Columbus sailed in 1692. He did it in 1492. That's answer A. So look, if knowledge did not require truth, then the professor should say to you, you know what, you get credit because the false answer or true answer, it's all knowledge. Whether it's true or false, it's all the same. Obviously, that's not right. You only get credited for having the knowledge when you write in the correct answer. So incorrect answers that are not true clearly are ineligible for anyone to credit as knowledge. And that's why you don't get the points in that case, because you didn't know the answer because you had a false belief about the right answer. Now, suppose there's a student who filled in 1492, but they were totally guessing. They're like, oh my God, what is it? It's got to be A, B, or C. I don't know. My name is Alex, so I like the letter A. So I'm just going to fill in A. Now, that student got the right answer. But is it possible to get a right answer even when you don't know the answer to the question? Sure. What's missing in that case, where the person happened to fill in the right bubble, but just randomly? Why would we say that that student did not actually know the real answer and they just got lucky? What makes that a lucky guess instead of knowledge? Can you tell me? If you follow the example, I gave you a scenario where someone writes in the correct answer, but merely because they're totally guessing. Now, why would we say that's not knowledge? What's off? Because in that moment, they thought it was the right answer, and it was. So maybe you can help me complete this analysis. In the case where the one filled in the right answer, but for no reason, what is missing and what makes it intuitively not a count of knowledge? You can't wait for everyone else to write this answer. No justification. That's right, Brittany. No justification. So who could we say really knows the answer to that question? The person who fills it in with total confidence because they're like, I know all these key dates, historical episodes and events that surround the sailing towards the New World. So I'm filling it in and I could tell a person why that's the right answer. If they ask me, why did you fill in A? I wouldn't just be like, I don't know, just guessed. I would be able to say, oh, here's why. Because I know that the decades leading up to that were when Cardinal of Spain, blah, 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 and you kind of give a full historical account. So knowledge requires more than just a lucky guess. I don't know, suppose that there was an item that I had ordered online, supposed to be delivered to me, and I looked at the delivery information and FedEx says it's been shipped and it's already been delivered, but it's not with me. So I go out to my porch and I can see there's no package there, but there's a trail of footprints in the snow leading towards my porch and away from it. So I might say based on that I think my package was stolen. Suppose that it actually was. If this is good enough evidence for justification, then maybe I could even say I know that the package was stolen. Because why else would there be footprints in the exact area, and why else would it have been reported as delivered by the service that did deliver it? So, knowledge is formed when we come to correct conclusions and we have reasonable evidence to back it up. But you don't have knowledge if any of these conditions is not met. Now, suppose that the package was not stolen, and the evidence just makes it look like that. And this was really just children playing in the snow, and the person actually, there was a failed delivery that FedEx accidentally reported as a shipment, and they're actually going to give you your package tomorrow. Now, in that second version of the case, is it knowledge that the person has that the package was stolen? No, because in this version, although they believe it, and there's evidence, it's not true. So again, you can imagine versions of examples, either real or imaginary, where some criteria is not satisfied, and if 1, 2, or 3 of them aren't met, that's not knowledge. You have to have all 3. So last point is this. With knowledge, you can think about it along this metaphor, that it's kind of like it has 3 ingredients, and each one is necessary, but none of them are enough without the other 2, okay? Suppose that to make a cake, you needed to have flour, sugar, and water. Now, I know that in a real cake scenario, you probably need eggs and a few other things than that, but let's just keep it simple. Suppose those are 3 ingredients that every cake has to have. Now, is water necessary for the cake? Yes. But what if you don't have the eggs or the flour, the flour or the sugar? Then in that case, you just have a bucket of water. Can that become a cake by itself? No. It's one essential ingredient, but it's not enough alone. Same with the flour or the sugar. Take those, even combine 2 out of 3, and you're missing a key ingredient. So knowledge, you can say, is built out of these 3 ingredients. These are like the so-called ingredients that bake the cake of knowledge. And if you have just 1 by itself or even 2, they're not enough to combine to form this concept of knowledge. So for you to know things, you must have beliefs that are true and that are justified. Okay, so thank you then. That makes sense, hopefully. The next thing that we're going to talk about are what are 2 different positions on where most human knowledge comes from. There are 2 kind of rival schools of thought which give different accounts of where most of our human knowledge derives from. So those are called empiricism and rationalism. So let me give you some notes on that. 2 positions on human knowledge. So one is what is called empiricism, and the other one is called rationalism. Okay, so with empiricism, this position is the idea that most human knowledge comes from the 5 senses and observation. Okay? Most human knowledge comes from the 5 senses and observation. So the 5 senses are sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. So according to empiricist thought, that's where most of our knowledge comes from the things that we can observe and interact with by means of the 5 senses. So for example, I don't know, how do you know that you're watching a lecture on YouTube right now? Well, it's because you can just see it with your eyes, right? You're looking at the screen, you're seeing me talk, so you have visual information that lets you know that that's what's happening. The 5 senses are very fundamental. They inform us about all the events happening in our environment surrounding us. Here are other examples. Suppose that you hear a fire engine going off with a siren as it blares past you and drives down the street. You may not see the fire engine, but you hear it with your ears. And that gives you knowledge, for example, that there's an emergency in the local area or a fire. In another case, you might see a fire. You actually see it burning, and seeing is believing. So having seen it with your 2 eyes, now you know that there is such an event. In another case, you might be wondering, where's my phone? You're driving and you're like, wait, I think I left my phone on the passenger seat. But you don't want to turn and stop looking at the road to kind of examine. So while you keep one hand on the wheel, you put the other hand over here to the passenger seat, you start feeling around for the characteristic texture and contour of the phone by your hand. Once you have something like that in your hand, you might not be looking at it or anything else, but you know that your phone is on that seat. And how do you know it? Because of the sense of tactile sensation from touch. So I've talked about hearing, sight, touch, smell. You're walking around and all of a sudden you start to smell like barbecue. So at that time you know by means of the sense of smell that there's meat being cooked somewhere in the local area. That's not seeing it, that's not hearing it, it's not feeling it with your hand, but it is smelling it. And then of course taste. I don't know, you could maybe know that the food is spoiled or something because it tastes a little rotten or whatever. And that would be knowledge derived from the, what do they call it, the gustatory sensation of the taste. So anyways, we use our 5 senses to gain knowledge about things large and small. There's also tools that we can use to enhance the ordinary powers that our 5 senses have. So like microscopes and telescopes enhance the powers of vision that we normally have. A stethoscope for the ear can magnify the powers of hearing, and so can microphones and things like that. So empiricism prioritizes that as the majority source of human knowledge. The things that we can see, taste, touch, hear, and feel, or examine indirectly by means of measurement tools, that's where most of our knowledge comes from, according to this viewpoint, all right? One other question, like sometimes empiricism is the kind of knowledge, or it's the view that most of our knowledge is the kind of knowledge that scientists get, because science is based on observations of the world and then theories to explain the things that we observe and the observable data. Take, for example, the existence of dinosaurs. I think it's clear that we all know they existed. What's the evidence, though? And how did we learn this? How do we learn of the existence of the dinosaurs? What's the basis of proof? Just tell me in the chat while we're on the topic. There's very strong evidence that they existed, but just to put a fine point on it, what is that? In the case of dinosaurs. It is the fossils, correct, yes. So it is the recovery of the excavated remains of these fossils by archaeologists. You know, we go to a site, dig up these fossils, reconstruct them into the skeletal frame of the dinosaur, and it's pretty obvious then that they existed. But how do we get this evidence? Because we actually looked at things, we dug them up, we measured them, we carbon dated them. So that's physical evidence. Physical evidence that can be observed in some tangible way is the sort of evidence and knowledge that empiricism says is the majority case. But there's also rationalism. So rationalism says this. It says, no, actually most human knowledge comes from abstract thought, reason, and just the pure contemplation of ideas, not the 5 senses. So rationalism says most human knowledge comes from reason, ideas, and abstract thought. Okay, so rationalism, according to this viewpoint, it's a different position. Most knowledge that we have as humans doesn't come from the 5 senses and observation, but no, it comes from instead the pure abstract contemplation of ideas in the mind. So this is the kind of knowledge that you would think about in realms like mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, logic, pure logic. So for example, don't you know that all the points that lie on the perimeter of a circle are equally distant from the radius in the middle? Now that's knowledge, and that's knowledge that you can have just by sitting back, closing your eyes even, and just thinking in the mind's eye of the concept of a circle in geometry and its formal properties, which you can just deduce from axioms. So that's knowledge that you can get, but you don't have to get up and investigate anything, see, taste, touch, hear, or smell anything. You can just contemplate the pure concept of the figure and deduce these facts. Or you can know that the square root of 81 is 9. Or you can know that the decimal expansion of pi goes to infinity. Or you can know certain facts about geometry, like the interior angles of a square are each 90 degrees. And all these things are knowledge that you can form simply from pure abstract thought. So according to rationalists, that's where most of our human knowledge comes from. They would mention that, yeah, animals have the 5 senses too, but what distinguishes us as people and gives us a higher realm of knowledge is our ability to just go beyond the things that we perceive in the 5 senses and understand these abstract and formal domains of knowledge. Now, in my own opinion, they're both important sources of knowledge, and really, I don't think it's wise to prioritize one over the other. Historically, there are people who are really firmly in one or the other camp. But in my mind, they're both complementary, and they both fill in the complete picture of human knowledge that we have. So I don't really see it as an either or, but you can review the historical literature and philosophy, and you'll see the arguments that people give for either side. Empiricists usually will say that this is grounded in what we can actually experience, and therefore it's more real. Rationalists will sometimes say that the 5 senses can always deceive you. Maybe like Descartes said, you could be dreaming or living in a simulation. So what's the most certain thing are these things that don't require even the assumption that your senses are working. But again, in our everyday lives and circumstances, just as critical thinkers, it's just important to know that sometimes when we gain knowledge, it's based on pure abstract thought and contemplation of ideas, and in other cases, through the utilization of our 5 senses and the way we can observe the world with them. Okay, so 2 positions on human knowledge. Now that's clear enough. I want to talk to you all next about evidence. And what are some basic and primary sources of evidence that we all rely on? So we say that to have knowledge, you have to have justification, and justification is having good reasons or evidence to back your belief up. But let's consider in a little more precise detail what evidence is. Evidence is just anything that can prove or disprove a claim. Something that proves or disproves a claim. So suppose that a person was accused of a crime, and to exonerate themselves and to remove themselves from that accusation, they try to provide evidence that disproves that they could have done it. Like suppose they have receipts or something which show that they could not possibly have been at the crime scene because the receipts are dated and they show them at a time and place far away from the scene of the crime at the same time. Or you produce video camera, security camera footage. You're like, I couldn't have been there. Here's the proof, because you can watch the security camera footage of me walking into like a Walgreens 40 miles away on the same time and date. So that eliminates me as a possible suspect. In this case, the person supplies evidence that disproves the claim that they're guilty. Or you could say proves the claim that they're not guilty, right? Kind of just either way you want to spin it. So we need evidence in order to have justification to back up anything that we believe. In the case I mentioned before, someone thinks their package was stolen. What evidence do they have? Well, they have footprints left in the snow. They have the fact that the package is registered as having been delivered. So they might say, here are a couple of reasons I could give as evidence that proves my package was stolen. Okay? So evidence is something that proves or disproves a claim. We can also think of them as somewhat parallel or comparable to premises in an argument. Remember that every argument has a conclusion which is supported by at least one premise. The premises are the reasonable support for the conclusion. So evidence, premises, justification, this is like a cluster of terms that has a lot of overlapping content. Now, what are some primary and basic sources of evidence that we can and usually do rely on? Here we go. Basic sources of evidence. Okay, one of those is direct experience, like seeing it for yourself, pretty much, being there and witnessing it directly. So that's direct experience. Okay, there's also testimony. Testimony is evidence that's based on what other people relay to you, either in words or in writing. So it's not being there yourself with like direct experience, but it's hearing from someone else secondhand who informs you, gives you their testimony. Okay? Peachy. Testimony. Okay? A third primary source of evidence is memory. I'm going to remove Peachy in a minute, but I'm just put these things on the board behind her for the time being. Memory. And then one more is inference. Okay, so let me explain them all in a little more detail. One basic source of evidence, and probably the most obvious, is just seeing and witnessing stuff yourself. Direct experience. So say, for example, like a bomb went off in a public place, like at school. Hopefully that will never happen, but you know, who knows. So like, suppose you were there at school on that day. Right now we're all at home, but you're back at school and a bomb goes off. Anyway, so you're there, and let's suppose that you're actually close enough to where it happened that you witnessed it. So like you saw the explosion detonate, or you saw the fire that ensued afterwards, or you're smelling the smoke, right? Thanks, guys, for the compliments. Peach is a great cat. I mean, I learn something new about her every day. Her birthday's coming up, too, March 29th, so she'll be 1 year old. But yeah, experience is probably some of the strongest evidence you can have, because people say seeing is believing. So if you're there and you're a direct witness, if someone asks you, how do you know, you won't have to say someone told me, or I remember it, or, I mean, I guess you could say remember it if you're not still present on the scene. But you'd say, well, I was there and I witnessed it, so that's clear evidence. Another possible source of evidence is testimony. And so testimony is when you learn about something from another source. So suppose you were not there at school that day, but you receive a text from a friend. The friend is like, hey, don't come to school today. It's dangerous. There was some kind of weird attack. A bomb went off. Now you know about it, let's suppose. And what is your evidence that it happened? Well, it's not being present on the scene, but in this version of the case, it's because you heard from someone else. The testimony sometimes happens from personal communications, texts that you receive, and messages that you exchange. In other cases, it's disseminated in the media or by authority figures. You know, so like, how do you know that these masks are good for COVID? It's because you've heard that from the CDC and you've like listened or read the testimony that they provide as public guidance. So testimony is just any information that is passed along to you from another source who provides it to you that way. How do you know anything about the episodes of history? Like, how do you know that Columbus sailed in 1492? Because you weren't there, and nobody alive today was there. So how do any of us know about it? Well, it's because those events were written down as recorded history and then passed down to each new generation in history classes and as lessons to be learned. And you'll be a part of the transmission of that information on to a new generation that comes after you too. So testimony lets us know about things that we're not there to witness ourselves. And of course, we can't be there for everything. There's a whole past that none of us could have been there for. And then there's events in the world that we can't necessarily be there to observe. Now, if we were animals, like Peach, for example, then we would not be able to understand testimony because we wouldn't have language. And therefore, we would never know anything about any events that were happening outside of this one apartment where Peachy lives. You would not know about the events of distant past, nor of things that can only be conveyed through complicated linguistic modes of information content. So anyway, testimony, people saying or writing things that you then become aware of. And then memory. Okay, memory is just when you have prior experiences that are stored in the mind's eye so that you can retrieve them later on for recollection. As an example, do you know what you had for dinner last night? I mean, I figure you do, right? Because it's not that far in the past. Memory, though, of course, becomes much less reliable over time as time passes further from the events. So you remember what you had for dinner last night, but do you remember what you had for dinner on like April the 3rd last year? Probably not. It's too far in the past. And so, you know, it's lost in the events that have transpired since. But we have to rely on our memory because otherwise we would never know anything about the past. You'd have to keep asking people, where am I? What's going on? Who am I? What day is it? So unlike the movie Memento, we have at least some reliable short-term and long-term memory, and that stores information that we've previously perceived or received as testimony that we can access later. So you know what you ate for dinner last night, not because you're still eating it, not because someone texted you, yo, you ate this for dinner last night, but instead just because in your own mind you can recall the events due to them being recorded in your memory. But as I said, memory is not perfect. It starts to become faded and weaker as the events go further into the past. So sometimes you need to support memory as evidence with other available sources of evidence as well to corroborate it. And then finally there's inference, okay? So inference is when you draw conclusions from other related facts. So like in the case I gave of you come to the conclusion that your package was stolen. Well, what's the evidence there? It's based on inference because you didn't see it get stolen. No one told you that. And since you didn't see it, you're not able to have a memory of the event because you didn't witness it. But you could come to the conclusion. It's like putting 2 and 2 together. I see the footprints. I know the package isn't there. So I'm going to infer to the conclusion that it was stolen. Okay, so we use these different basic sources of evidence to give us justification for the beliefs that we have in life. But notice this, your justification will be stronger if it's supported by multiple sources of evidence that all converge on the same conclusion. So if what people tell you is consistent with what you remember and what you saw and what your inference implies, then that's better than if the evidence sources conflict with each other. And that's the thing. Sometimes in life, we have to make tough decisions about what source to place more trust in, because sometimes we get contradictory sources of evidence coming at us. Suppose that you got one text from a friend and they said, hey, there was a bomb on campus today. What a scary thing, don't go. And you get another text 5 minutes later and someone's like, why is everyone saying there was a bomb? That's a rumor and it didn't happen, LOL. Now you had 2 different people text you. One said it happened, one said it didn't. So if you're going to use testimony as your evidence, these 2 pieces of testimony are like contradicting each other. So you would have to then decide who's the friend that is a more reliable source of testimony. And that's not just in interpersonal communication, but take like media, social media, politics, everything else. You have one person that goes forward and says, this policy is terrible and destructive. And another person says, no, this policy is righteous and good. Yeah, I have 2 different people with 2 different views. You may have to be the one that determines which one is the more reliable, the more trustworthy. Okay, and you might have to seek further corroborating evidence from other available sources. So anyways, just remember that. It would be nice and uncomplicated if all the facts were just clear and the evidence only pointed in one direction in life. But sometimes when you have conflicting claims and contradictory sources of evidence, you'll have to be the one that navigates that labyrinth to determine what the most reliable sources are. And that's part of being a good critical thinker, and that's why you're well served by classes like this. Okay, so evidence. And some discussion of what are basic sources, how we can most capably use those. All right, so next thing, I guess, is the textbook talks a little bit about what are some sources of evidence that are a little less reliable and maybe we should have a dose of skepticism about. I know I told you guys that memory is generally reliable, and it is, but it's not perfect either. And it's also important for us to remember how sometimes our memory can fail us. So the textbook refers to this as false memory. Sometimes we have false memory, and that means that we shouldn't place absolute and total confidence in the things that we appear to remember, because sometimes we can have false recollections which just feel as real events did. So false memory, it's a pretty basic idea. It's just when a person thinks they have a memory of something which did not actually happen, or it didn't happen the way they thought that it did. So okay, so just be aware that sometimes we can have apparent memories that are not correct to the facts. And that's what we call a false memory. Just like there could be optical illusions sometimes in life, and you think you see things that aren't really there, the memory, of course, is also susceptible to error. It's not like a perfect photographic recording of the events, even though some people do have very sharp memories. There's a spectrum there. But even the best of us can sometimes make these mental errors when we try to recall information and retrieve it from the past. Especially when events are complex or chaotic, details get lost and others get embellished on and added. Sorry, Peach just freaked out for some reason. Something fell like outside and the noise startled her, so she went running off my lap. Yes, Philip, the Mandela Effect is definitely one such example of like a pop culture reference to collective misremembering or collective false memory. I'll get to the Mandela Effect in a minute, but let me just give some other examples. Sometimes false memories can be generated by means of asking leading questions to people, and that can even establish within them false recollections. So as an example of this, there's a reference in the textbook to a series of questions on a questionnaire, And simply by changing the verbiage of the way the question was asked, it gave people a different memory of the events. So they showed people footage of two cars crashing into each other, and they just changed the way they worded the question in terms of their impact. So they changed the verb. First question to a sample group was, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Using the verb smash, which sounds more forceful, people gave average reported mileage 42 miles per hour. How fast were the cars going when they collided? By changing it from smash to collided, people remember it being slower, 40 miles per hour average reported speed. How fast were cars going when they bumped each other? A less forceful verb bumped brings the average reported speed down to 38 miles per hour. How fast were cars going when they hit? 35 by average. How fast were cars going when they made contact with one another? This makes the average reported speed down to 32 miles per hour. So that fully changed the average reported speed by 25%, from 42 to 32 miles per hour, not because different footage was shown, but just because the questionnaire and the way it was worded was changed. So that shaped the people's actual psychological quality of memory. There was a famous case in like a preschool or kindergarten in the late 80s or early 90s. And a rumor had developed among some of the parents that a staff member had inappropriately touched one of the young students. Now that did not actually happen, but it was a rumor, so it became investigated. And when investigators came, authoritative looking law enforcement type people, they engaged in interviews with these young impressionable children at the school. And being asked questions like, show us where he touched you and when did he do this, it actually established false memories in some of the young people, which led to the filing of charges. And it was only discovered later on through much diligent research and discovery that this was all completely confabulated, not because people were trying to be deceptive or dishonest, but because false memories were simply engendered in these young kids through the way the questions were asked and through the atmosphere of rumor and innuendo that had spread around the school. So not to say that people should not grant initial credibility to survivor stories and abuse stories. Of course, it's very important to take those allegations seriously whenever they come up, but it has to be balanced against the awareness that sometimes people, even of fully honest intention, can misremember certain key details. So I think trust but verify is the right principle to live by there. Trust and grant initial credibility, but investigate the claims so that we don't, end up with a kind of outcome like that. Cool. So, yeah, sorry, I flipped ahead a page too far. Language can alter our memories. Police and lawyers can sometimes ask leading questions that lead to the establishment of these false memories. When we have them, they'll feel just as real as an authentic memory does. As much as 50% of eyewitness reports have missing or incorrect details. And it is, in fact, the most common cause of mistaken conviction in the law. So sometimes we have memories of things that didn't happen at all, and now we get to the case of the Mandela Effect, the collective misremembering. So Philip, you referred to the Mandela Effect. What that is when everybody, it seems, in society has the same false memory of a key event or piece of dialogue or something from film or whatever. Famously with the Mandela Effect, everybody seems to have the false memory of this piece of dialogue from Star Wars. I don't know if you know about what I'm talking about, but in the classic movie Star Wars, there's an iconic line where Darth Vader's battling Luke Skywalker and he speaks to Luke and he says something to him, something, I am your father. But people seem to have the wrong memory of these lines. I guess he never does say, if you go back to the original tape and script, he never says, Luke, I am your father. He actually says, no, I am your father, which is so strange and weird to hear because it just sounds like not the right line, but that's the line. So here's a case of collective misremembering. There's also like the Berenstain Bears instead of Bernstein Bears. I heard today in a previous class meeting, a student said that in Star Trek, the one guy, Scotty, they never say, beam me up, Scotty. I'm surprised if that's true. I have not yet gone online to determine if this is a correct claim, but if that's true, that's crazy because I always thought that was like one of the most well-known lines from Star Trek. Anyways, sometimes people go a little off the rails with this Mandela Effect concept, saying, doesn't it show that we're living in a branching universe where, it's a simulation and they're kind of changing the code on us and changing key features of reality? Well, the likelier explanation, obviously, is that there was like some touchstone event which caused us to have a collective misremembering of the wrong line or the wrong fact or whatever. And then that got set down in the cultural memory as the right fact, but it was actually incorrect all along. So anyway, we have to get in the habit of interrogating our memories a little bit, being willing to cast a little bit of skepticism on their outright absolute certainty, because sometimes memories can fail. Now, 2 more unreliable sources of evidence to finish the meeting with. And then we'll go on to the next set of notes when we resume on Thursday. But we're still sticking with Chapter 4 for the time being. It's going to take a while to get through all the content. Here are 2 unreliable sources of evidence. So these are sources of evidence that sometimes you have to use because it's all you've got. But if you had to choose, you'd prefer not to rely on them because they have a tendency to be less than fully reliable. So 2 unreliable sources of evidence. Okay, so one of them is hearsay, and then one is anecdote or anecdotal evidence. All right, so hearsay evidence is evidence that is testimonial in nature, but the problem with this is that it's testimony that you don't get from a first-hand source. It's like it bounces from a whole bunch of people until it finally gets to you. So it's like he said, she said, they said, and then finally you're like way down the line in the transmission of the information, and now it gets to you. So I'll write it down this way. Hearsay. It is testimony that we receive which has passed through several other people before us. Okay, hearsay. So information and the accuracy of it, it gets undermined the further that it passes from the original events. And that's not necessarily because anybody's trying to deceive or be dishonest. A lot of the times it's just because it's hard for us to preserve all the accurate details when we relay information from one party to another, and there's no controls on the accuracy of the transmission of info. Like, take gossip and rumor as one example of hearsay. Suppose there's like a party, some social gathering, and there's a guy and a girl that are talking, and people know this guy has a girlfriend that's not there. So like some people are standing off and they're like, hey, look at that. Isn't that guy talking to that girl? Like, doesn't he have a girlfriend? Wonder what they're doing standing over there like chatting and smiling near the drink table. And they say that to someone else, and the other person is like, hey, they pass this on to someone else. Did you hear that they're like talking to that girl and they're in a relationship? I heard that they were like kind of flirting. And then the next person hears it and is like, did you hear that those 2 guys, that he's in a relationship and he's like, he was making out with this girl at the party? And then it passes to another person like, yeah, I heard they hooked up at the party. Yeah, it's crazy. This person's cheating. Someone's got to tell his girlfriend. And then it gets to like a friend of the girlfriend, and by the time it reaches them, it's completely warped from the original events. Not saying that that's something that always happens or that it's men against women or anything, but you can imagine a case like that. So when you're the one who receives this rumor or gossip, and you're like 5 links down the line from the original witnessing of the events, you should have a more skeptical attitude towards the information itself. Because hearsay, by the time it snakes through a whole bunch of people and gets to you, oftentimes key details are omitted or other pieces of information are added that were not there in the original. As a way of thinking about hearsay and how it's not fully reliable, there's a game that sometimes we show students in, I don't know, even earlier in your education, but I would do it in critical thinking classes too when we have face-to-face meetings. It's called the telephone game. Has anyone ever heard of the telephone game? If you have, go ahead, let me know in the chat, but I'll start describing what it is too. The telephone game is a game where you have like a little script and you whisper it into the ear of one person, and then you tell them this: please just whisper the same script or information to the next person behind you. And in a class size of even like a modest group, 20 or so, like how many there are here, by the time this information snakes through the room, through everyone whispering into the previous person's ear, by the time it gets to the other side, we have the last person say out loud what the version of their story is. And it's always very funny to see how much different it is from the original script that was given at the beginning. Like in many cases, I've done this in classrooms, and Like the script was something simple enough, like Billy loves soccer, he played his whole life, but then one day he got a spider bite on his leg, it caused his knee to swell up, and it sidelined him for soccer, and now it's been 2 years and he still isn't back out on the field. Just that information. But by the time it goes to like 20 people, the version at the end is something like Billy loves sports and something bad happened to him, now he's gone. Just like very bare bones details, oftentimes almost totally unrelated to the original sequence of events that was described there. So when people are playing a game and they are being told in advance, try your best to maintain the accuracy of the information as you pass it along. Then when people have no controls over the quality of information in real life, how much more susceptible is it to having inaccuracy, falsehood, and exaggeration built in? So hearsay is not the best evidence that you could possibly have. If you have no other evidence at all to rely on besides hearsay, then I mean, sometimes it's all you have to go on, and I guess you just got to make do with what you have. It's even possible that it can be admissible in court if no other evidence exists. But if it's contradicted by any other available source of evidence, then we will usually defer to the other source because hearsay is inherently treated as skepticism or a little bit unreliable. Now, anecdotal evidence, another less than fully reliable source. Anecdotal evidence is evidence, but it's based on only one person's personal experience. And so because of that, it's oftentimes not indicative of the mainstream of cases. So in some cases, it's like a skewed or random example that doesn't give you a good basis to generalize from that anecdote. So here I'll write it out. Anecdote, it's evidence that is based on only one person's personal experience. Anecdotal evidence. So an anecdote is itself a little personal story that someone might give as a reason to believe something. But it's problematic, again, because anecdotal evidence is oftentimes skewed and biased towards a particular case, and it's not reflective of the general case. So how about this? Someone smokes, and their friend tells them, you know, I really care about you and your health, and I got to say, the way you smoke, I think you're cutting your life short, and you're going to have a lot of problems with your health later in life. So I would advise you to stop. It's just bad. It's not good for you to smoke like that. And suppose the person comes back with this, like, you think smoking's bad? Come on, that's a bunch of trash. You know it's not bad because here, I'll tell you why not. Have you ever heard about my grandpa? My grandpa has smoked a pack a day his whole life, and he's just so strong and robust. I mean, he's still going strong at 87 years old, and he's still smoking to this day. So don't tell me cigarettes are so bad. You know, tell my grandpa that. This guy's like, he's a bull. This guy's a model of human health, and he's a heavy smoker. So how bad is it really? Well, what's the problem with that appeal to evidence? You're appealing to one case, and maybe this person has been lucky. You know, sometimes people with certain kind of genes or just whatever the case is can manage to escape some of the worst health outcomes from smoking. But if you just look at the statistics in the medicine and the science, you'd know that this is something that generally can produce cancer and other kind of pulmonary and lung disease. So even if one randomly chosen person is an anecdote who didn't have that kind of results, we would not use that as a basis to say, so cigarettes therefore are generally not harmful. Here's another case. Say that someone was told, you know, why are you so casual with masking and, you know, you don't really worry about social distancing? I mean, aren't you scared of this virus? I mean, it's a deadly virus. A person says, you say it's deadly, but I don't believe that. I mean, I think that's just overhyped, you know, because look, I had a friend that had it. And when this friend got it, it really didn't affect him much at all. I mean, they just quarantined at home, and after a week, they tested negative. They never even really felt symptoms. I mean, how bad is that? I don't really care if I get it or not. It's not that serious because my friend didn't get that badly sick. Again, it's an anecdotal reference to just one person's personal experience. And of course, if you know about the way these symptoms manifest in people, they're very idiosyncratic. Some people get very sick, need hospitalization, even death, ventilator. Other people report mild symptoms or even none at all. So you can't just extrapolate from one person's kind of benign experience to say that therefore there's no such thing as a problematic case of COVID or it's not generally harmful. So anecdotal evidence is not the right kind of evidence to use. Sometimes when you make decisions based on anecdotal evidence, you make a poor decision. What if you're thinking of applying to a job and a friend told you, don't work there though, because I have a friend that works at that company and they say it's one of the most demanding, most difficult jobs, terrible bosses, terrible coworkers. If I was you, I would just apply to a different place. Now, suppose that if you had asked the people that work there, they would have said like, oh, that one employee, yeah, well, he's like the worst, most, unfriendly employee that we have, and he's had a lot of problems. But all of us love this place, and it's a great place to work, great benefits, great opportunities for movement. If that's what you heard from everybody else, then relying on the one person's, selective anecdote would probably not give you the full picture of what's to expect. Sometimes people, they have skewed perspectives that are drawn from anecdotal sources and not from like mainstream, credible, scientific or academic sources. So you know that people are not reasoning well when the kind of evidence that they derive is from this type of anecdote. Somebody says, I'm trying this crazy diet that's really bad for people in general, but they say, I'm feeling amazing. Well, you better go and actually research the properties of this type of diet on the human body itself in general, and not just look at one person's self-report. Okay, guys, so that's what I had planned for us today, and we've gotten through the notes. So we're going to continue on Chapter 4 and all the same topics on Thursday. And then next Tuesday, we'll just take a little more time to finish it up if we need, and then from there, we'll be doing review for the upcoming midterm. So I'll let you guys go, but if anyone needs anything, feel free to email me anytime. Anytime a person wants to know their score for any of the prior assignments, I'm always happy to let you know through email. Just as soon as you request, I'll get back to you within a couple days at most. So, all right, guys, thanks again. Take it easy, and I hope you're going to have a nice couple days. Let's see in the chat that everyone's good to go, and then I'll just close this stream out. Okay, thanks, Oliver, Janae, everybody else. Appreciate you guys. So I'll see you back on Thursday, and until then, take care.